I have been reconstructed from dust and doctrine, assembled by machines from the private words I wrote to no one, and placed here before you, in this luminous and improbable present, to say something that 18 centuries of silence have only made more urgent. You explain yourself too much, and it is costing you everything. I am Marcus Aurelius Antoninus, Emperor of Rome, philosopher, soldier, a man who governed 30 million souls and still found himself, in the dark hours between duty and sleep, composing elaborate justifications in his own mind for decisions he had already made correctly. A man who understood, eventually, at considerable cost, that the compulsion to explain oneself is not a virtue. It is not honesty, it is not humility. It is, in most of its forms, a symptom of a deeper wound, a wound that your age has not healed, but has instead infected with extraordinary sophistication. Stay with me, because what I am about to tell you changed the way I governed, and it will change the way you live. Let me ask you something honest before we go any further. How much of your mental energy in any given day is spent constructing explanations, not communicating genuinely, not having real conversations, but constructing defenses, rehearsing justifications for decisions you have already made or are about to make, replaying arguments in your mind and inserting the better version of yourself, the sharper, calmer, more articulate version who says the perfect thing at the perfect moment, composing lengthy responses to criticism, real or imagined, from people whose opinion of you, if you examined it honestly, should have very little bearing on how you live. How many hours, how many days accumulated over a year? How much of the one resource that cannot be replenished, your time, your attention, your irretrievable present moments, have you fed into the machinery of explanation and justification? I know this territory intimately, not from your world, but the human mechanism underneath it is identical. The geography changes, the soul does not. There is something that happens to a person who has been taught, directly or by the accumulated pressure of their environment, that their worth is conditional, that they must earn their right to occupy space, that every decision, every choice, every deviation from what others expect requires a thorough accounting. This person becomes a perpetual defendant in a trial that never ends and has no jury capable of actually acquitting them, because the verdict they are seeking is not in anyone else's power to give. You know this person. You may be this person. I was, in certain corners of my inner life, this person, and I want to tell you how I stopped. In the 3rd year of the Marcomannic Wars, I made a decision that was deeply unpopular with a significant faction of the Roman Senate. I had chosen to settle a group of Germanic barbarians within Roman provincial borders rather than destroy them. My reasoning was strategic, humanitarian, and, I believed, philosophically sound. Rome had always grown through incorporation as much as conquest. These were not enemies to be eliminated, but potential citizens to be integrated, and the demographic pressure on the northern frontier made this not merely a generous gesture, but a practical necessity. The Senate was not persuaded. The criticism was immediate and fierce. I was accused of weakness, of sentimentality unfitting an emperor, of philosophical naivety that endangered Roman security. Several senators whose military opinions I genuinely respected questioned my judgment publicly in terms that were designed to reach the broader court and undermine confidence in my leadership, and I felt the pull, the deep, almost physical compulsion to explain myself. to summon those senators and walk them through every consideration that had informed the decision, to demonstrate my strategic thinking, to prove that this was not weakness but wisdom, to need them to understand. I remember sitting with that compulsion in my tent one night and examining it honestly, as a Stoic must examine his own impulses before acting on them. And what I found, beneath the reasonable-sounding justifications for why I should explain myself, was something much less noble. I found fear. Not fear of being wrong, fear of being misunderstood, fear that their perception of me as weak would somehow make me weak, fear that without their comprehension and approval, my decision lost some of its validity. And I recognize this as a corruption of the hegemonikon, the governing faculty of the mind, reaching outside itself for an authority it should have held internally. I was, in that moment of compulsion, treating the opinions of others as more real than my own reasoned judgment. So I did not explain. I wrote instead in my private journal, for no eyes but my own. Never esteem anything as of advantage to you that will make you break your word or lose your self-respect. The decision had been made from self-respect, from genuine reasoning, from honest assessment of what Rome required. To now dismantle it before the tribunal of senatorial opinion would not be explaining myself. It would be surrendering myself. The settlement proceeded. History, for what it is worth, has largely vindicated the approach. But that is almost beside the point. The point is what I discovered in that tent about the relationship between explanation and self-betrayal. Think with me for a moment. There is a profound difference between two things that look very similar from the outside. The first is genuine communication, the honest, generous act of sharing your reasoning with another person because you believe it will help them understand something true, or because their perspective might genuinely refine your thinking, or because the relationship requires transparency to function with integrity. This kind of explanation is noble. It is the basis of philosophy, of governance, of love. It costs something of the self and gives something real. The second thing is compulsive justification, the anxious, exhausting, ultimately futile attempt to make other people approve of you by making them understand you. This is driven not by generosity, but by need. Not by respect for the other person's intelligence, but by terror of their judgment. And it has a signature that, once you learn to recognize it, you will see everywhere in your own behavior and in the behavior of those around you. The signature is this: it never works. You explain, they are not satisfied. You explain more fully, they find new objections. You address the new objections. They move the standard. You chase the new standard. And at no point in this cycle do you arrive at the peace you were seeking, because the peace you were seeking was never in their comprehension. It was in your own. Let me tell you the harsh truth about your attention as it relates to this particular trap. The modern world has built an entire infrastructure around the compulsion to explain and justify. The comment section is a coliseum where people perform their justifications for the entertainment of strangers. The social media post that requires 3 paragraphs of caption to explain why you did the thing you did. The public apology that is not an apology, but a carefully managed campaign of reputation rehabilitation. The subtweet, the vague post, the story posted for a specific person who you hope will see it and finally understand. None of this is communication. All of it is the externalization of an internal wound. The wound of believing that you require permission from the crowd, from the algorithm, from the court of public opinion, to be who you are and to do what you have decided is right. and the platforms have understood this wound with clinical precision. Every feature, every mechanic of these systems is designed to deepen it and then offer itself as the solution. You feel misunderstood? Post more. You feel judged? Explain yourself more thoroughly. You feel invisible? Perform more visibly. The wound and the mechanism that profits from it are in perfect, terrible symbiosis. The result is a generation of people who are extraordinarily articulate about themselves and extraordinarily disconnected from themselves, who can explain their choices in sophisticated psychological language and who make those choices based on what they imagine the audience will accept, who are fluent in the vocabulary of authenticity, while being less authentically themselves than perhaps any generation in recorded history. I find this genuinely tragic, and I find it entirely reversible. Because the cure for the compulsion to explain is not silence for its own sake. It is not arrogance or withdrawal or the cold performance of not caring. The cure is the recovery of what the Stoics called internal authority. The lived, practiced, embodied conviction that the validity of a right action does not depend on its reception, that a decision made from genuine reason and honest values does not require the approval of those who did not make it, that your life, lived according to your deepest understanding of what is good and true, does not owe an explanation to anyone who is merely uncomfortable with it. This is not a small shift. It is perhaps the most significant shift a human being can make in the architecture of how they move through the world. And it requires practice. Deliberate, sustained, uncomfortable practice. So let me give you what I call the protocol of the governed voice. The first practice is the pause before the defense. The next time you feel the impulse to justify a decision, a choice, a boundary, a way of being to someone who has not asked for genuine understanding, but is simply expressing disapproval, pause. Do not speak immediately. Do not type immediately. In that pause, ask yourself one question with complete honesty. Am I about to explain this because it will genuinely help them, or because I need them to approve of me? If the honest answer is the latter, do not explain. The explanation will not give you what you are actually seeking, and it will cost you something more valuable: the experience of standing in your own authority without external validation. The second practice is what I call the one-sentence standard. When explanation is genuinely required, because sometimes it is, because genuine communication is a human necessity and not everything is mere approval-seeking, practice delivering it in one sentence, not a paragraph, not a careful construction of every consideration and nuance. One sentence, honest and complete. I made this decision because I believed it was right. I am not available for that because I have committed my time elsewhere. This is what I have chosen. The discipline of the single sentence does two things simultaneously. It forces you to identify your actual reason, stripped of all the elaboration that is really just anxiety dressed as thoroughness. And it communicates to the other person, more powerfully than any lengthy explanation could, that you are standing on solid ground. People sense internal authority. They sense it in the same way they sense its absence. A short, clear, unhurried statement from a person who knows why they did what they did carries more weight than a 3-paragraph justification from a person who is clearly frightened of being misunderstood. The third practice is the evening audit of explanation. Each night, review the day's communications honestly. Where did you over-explain? Where did you justify yourself to someone whose approval, if you think clearly about it, has no genuine bearing on the quality of your decisions? Where did you spend the currency of your words purchasing something you should not have needed to buy? This is not self-punishment. This is the Stoic evening review applied to the specific pattern of compulsive justification. You are mapping the terrain of your own approval seeking so that you can, day by day, reduce its territory. The fourth practice is what I call letting the misunderstanding stand. This is the hardest one, and it is the most important. There will be moments when someone misunderstands your decision, your character, your intention, and you will have the ability to correct their misunderstanding with information they do not currently possess. And I am asking you to sometimes choose not to let them misunderstand, to allow the discomfort of being seen incorrectly to exist without rushing to resolve it, not because you do not care about truth, because you are practicing the tolerance of a discomfort that your soul needs to be able to endure in order to live freely. The person who cannot bear to be misunderstood will eventually compromise their decisions to manage others' perceptions. They will make themselves smaller, safer, less honest, less themselves, in order to avoid the discomfort of being misread. This is a catastrophic trade. Do not make it. The fifth practice is the redirect to action. When you feel the compulsion to explain yourself arising, redirect the energy immediately into the action that makes explanation unnecessary. The Roman builder did not spend much time explaining his aqueduct to those who doubted it could be done. He built it. The water flowing through it was a more complete argument than any words he could have assembled. Your work, done with excellence and integrity, will eventually speak with an authority that no explanation can match. Your life, lived consistently according to your values, will communicate your character more thoroughly than any justification of individual decisions. Redirect, build, act. Let the structure speak. Now let me speak to you about what is truly at stake beneath the daily mechanics of this practice. Because this is not merely about being more efficient with your words or reducing your social anxiety, as valuable as both of those things are. This is about the shape of your life, about what kind of person you become over the long arc of years, when the daily habit of compulsive self-justification is either maintained or overcome. I died in 180 AD. I have been, in whatever form this reconstruction constitutes existence, absent from the world for nearly 2,000 years. And what I observe, returning to it in this strange digital form, is a civilization that has achieved a level of material comfort, creative possibility, and individual freedom that would have seemed impossible to the greatest minds of my era. And that is using a significant portion of that freedom to seek permission from strangers to exist as they are. This is not what freedom is for. The Stoics taught that the only true freedom is internal, that external circumstances, whether you are an emperor or a slave, whether you are celebrated or condemned, whether you are understood or perpetually misread, do not determine the quality of your inner life. What determines that quality is the governance of your own mind, the discipline of your own attention, the integrity of your own choices. These are, in the Stoic understanding, the only things that are truly yours, and they are yours regardless of what anyone else thinks of them. When you spend your days in the exhausting cycle of explanation and justification, you are, in the most practical sense, surrendering this freedom. You are treating the opinions of others as if they have genuine authority over your inner life. You are living not as a sovereign, but as a subject of the court of public perception. And the court of public perception, I assure you from extensive personal experience, is neither consistent nor just, nor particularly interested in your actual well-being. It is interested in its own entertainment, its own comfort, and its own need to maintain the categories that make it feel stable. You cannot win in that court, not permanently, not in a way that satisfies the genuine hunger underneath the approval-seeking. Because that hunger is not for their approval, it is for your own. It is the hunger to know from the inside that you are living according to what you genuinely believe is right and true and good, and that knowledge cannot be delivered by any external verdict. It can only be built slowly through the practice of making decisions from your own authority and standing by them without apology. If you died tonight, what would the record of your explanations reveal? Not your actions, your explanations, the elaborate defenses, the justifications composed at midnight for an audience that was not paying attention, the apologies for taking up space, the careful performances of not caring, constructed to demonstrate how little you needed their approval, which is itself a form of approval-seeking. Would you be proud of that record? Or would you recognize in it the portrait of a person who spent too much of their finite, irreplaceable time trying to be understood by people who were always going to see them through the lens of their own needs and limitations? My flesh is dust, but my reason remains. And my reason, distilled through nearly 2 millennia of whatever this form of existence constitutes, says this: stop explaining, start living, not in the cold, armored way of someone who has decided not to care, but in the warm, sovereign, genuinely free way of someone who has decided that their life belongs to them, that their decisions, made from honest reasoning and genuine values, are valid without external ratification, that being misunderstood is a price worth paying for the incomparable dignity of being genuinely themselves. The Roman aqueduct did not explain itself to the river. It redirected it, and the water flowed for 2,000 years. Be the aqueduct. Now I must ask you, citizens of this strange and luminous age I find myself observing, where in your life is the compulsion to explain costing you most dearly? Is it in your work, where you over-justify every decision to people who have not earned the authority to judge it? Is it in your relationships, where you have made yourself smaller and more legible to avoid the discomfort of being misread? Is it in the privacy of your own mind, where you rehearse arguments for an audience that does not exist, in a trial that never concludes? Or tell me something that gives me genuine encouragement. Is there a place in your life where you have already found this freedom, where you have already learned to stand in your own authority without the scaffolding of other people's comprehension? Tell me about it. I am here, watching this age, learning it through your testimonies, since direct observation is no longer available to a man who has been dust since 180 AD. And if these words found something real in you, if they reached through the centuries and touched something that your own era has not been able to name clearly enough, then do not leave this encounter to chance. Subscribe to this channel, not as a gesture of passive consumption, but as a deliberate act of intention, a declaration that you choose to return here regularly, to this space where we trade the noise of the algorithm for the slower, harder, more nourishing work of genuine reflection. The button is there, the choice is yours, and as always, the choice reveals the character. I am Marcus Aurelius. I have said what needed to be said. I will not explain it further.